Hi, I'm Evie Gresbeck, and welcome back to my podcast, Cleats Off, where a high school soccer player discusses the ins and outs of what it means to play girls' soccer in America. I didn't make a script for today's episode because I'm going to be talking about mental health, which is something that is very near and dear to, I think, many athletes, including myself, and I thought that it was important to keep this episode more human and less robotic, which I think can come out more when people use scripts. So, yeah, let's just get into it. I think mental health is something that like every athlete deals with, and it can help you either thrive or it can put you in the gutter in terms of like energy and your drive. And I think mental health is something super important to talk about in terms of athletes because athletic performance isn't just physical. Your mental state directly impacts how you perform and your confidence and your decision making when you are doing your sport. And I think so many people struggle with mental health when they're playing a sport and they want a resource, and there are not as many resources for athletes and their mental health just because there's such a stigma around bad mental health in sports, even though as a society and as a culture we are evolving into people that value mental health just as much as we value physical health. And I think finding a balance between keeping yourself healthy in your brain and doing what you want to do and competing in your sport is very important. I think bad mental health is fueled so much by the high pressure situations that athletes are put in so often. I mean, like competition, expectations, scholarships, comparison, it's all stuff that can increase stress and anxiety, which can eventually lead to burnout and a hate for your sport and even depression, which is extremely difficult to deal with. I think athletes feel pressure in so many areas of their lives, and that's only amplified by sports just because you feel pressure not only in school and from your parents and your friends and your teachers, but you also feel it from your coaches and your teammates and yourself internally, because I think a lot of athletes tend to prioritize performance over how they feel, and I think that comes from a fear of failure and letting people down, and that really just turns into your sport becoming stressful and not fun. And I think it's really difficult for athletes because even though we are evolving into this culture that supports mental health, I think there's still such a stigma around it in sports culture. The tough it out mentality discourages people from talking to their coaches or their family or their friends and teammates about what they're going through, because they should just tough it out and, oh, if you're tired, you're just tired, get over it, it's not that big of a deal. And they can be seen as a weakness in athletes instead of something that's like normal and manageable and happens to everyone. I think changing that stigma and that culture in and around sports is something that's very important, because athletes need to feel safe and they need to feel that they are able to ask for help, because sometimes you really need help. Another thing besides pressure and expectation that can really hurt people is your identity being tied to your sport. I know so many people who they say, "Oh my God, my sport is the one thing I'm good at." So they put this extra pressure on themselves because that's who they are in their mind, and that is so detrimental. Just because if something happens like injuries, losses, retirement, whatever, it can cause a sense of loss and a loss of yourself and your identity, which can be really hard. A lot of people I know who have left their sport behind as they grow, they really lose themselves and they lose their identity, and that can lead to depression and just really terrible things for your mental health, which is awful. And I think it's important to build a sense of yourself outside of your athletics, not only your athletics, but everything that you do. As a person, you matter just because you are a person, and what you're good at does not define you, and what you're bad at does not define you. Um, and I think that that's something that a lot of athletes, including myself, don't really understand because we care so much about our sport and it's become so intertwined with our identity that it leads to us feeling as though we are not enough and we are not good enough and we are not worthy when we do not perform to our expectations and win. Losing is something that's very good for people to experience because it leads to growth. Another thing that really hurts athletes when it comes to mental health is overtraining. I did an episode about this a couple months ago. When you spend the majority of your time thinking, talking, doing one thing, it's very hard on your mental health when that thing becomes disrupted. I also think spending too much time out there physically is damaging not only to your body but also to your brain. It can just lead to exhaustion. I know when I'm in high school season for soccer and we have practices and games every day, extra trainings on the weekends, by the end of the season, I'm just done and I'm excited to stop doing all of that. So, burnout is real and it can cause a loss of motivation, irritability, and decreased performance, which no athlete wants to experience. I think when you love your sport, that is really difficult. Trying not to burn yourself out is very important. Making sure that you have a balanced life, you're resting, you're recovering. All of that is essential to keeping yourself mentally healthy, but also physically healthy. This doesn't just happen to student athletes, even though I think it is even more prominent in student athletes because they deal with so much more. Like, we live in a culture where people are finally starting to talk out about mental health and saying, oh my God, it's so important that you're mentally healthy, but then student athletes, they come up against all these people who are telling them you need to do this, you need to do that, you're not doing well enough here, you're not doing well enough there. I mean, honestly, I have been told that I am not doing enough with my time. I have been told that I need to be doing more extracurriculars to get myself into college, even though I spend the majority of my time in school and the majority of my free time that I'm not doing schoolwork, I am playing soccer or I'm studying for the SAT. It's stress inducing and anxiety inducing knowing that I might not be doing enough to ensure a future for myself. And I think that that happens to so many high schoolers, that we get told to enjoy our lives in high school and that it's supposed to be the best time of our lives. You don't need to be stressed. And then at the same time, we're told, oh, if you don't get this score on the SAT, if you don't get this GPA, if you're not doing this and this and this outside of school and you're not performing well enough in your sport, that you have no future. And that's something that's incredibly exhausting, at least for me. Hanging with that over your head for days, months, years while you're in high school just gets to be so draining that eventually you just want to stop. But it's important that you keep going. You should, however, acknowledge that your mental health does matter and that taking breaks is okay and that you do not need to be perfect, because perfection is something that I think everyone strives for, but it does not exist. And I think like even these athletes and these people who come across as so perfect and so great also struggle with their mental health and trying to be the best version of themselves they can be and perform the best that they can perform. I mean, Simone Biles, Michael Phelps, Alyssa Liu, who just won the gold medal in women's figure skating, have all struggled with mental health at one time or another, and they've come back even stronger after dealing with it. I think many athletes just tend to push it to the side and overlook it and say, oh, well, I'm just stressed right now. It'll pass, whatever. And it only gets worse. I think, you really need to acknowledge it and sit with it and reflect on it and try to help yourself get better rather than just trying to push through it for yourself, because you're not really doing yourself any favors if you do not address it. These athletes have really helped the world and the sports community normalize conversations about mental health and the stigma that there is with mental health in the sports community. And it shows that, like, even people who can be seen as perfect and elite and they perform at the highest level also struggle with their mental health, and that it's a very normal thing that needs to be addressed as though it is normal and not shied away from, as I think many people do. Talking to someone is important. Therapists, coaches, teammates, those all are great places to discuss things that you are struggling with. And I think also developing routines for helping manage it before it becomes a struggle is something that's really important. Taking breaks is important. Having supportive environments is important. Making sure that you're surrounding yourself with people who also love what they do and just want to enjoy it and want to show up just because they love it and prioritize not only their well-being but yours as well. And I think going towards a society and a sports culture that prioritizes mental health is something that's very important. And I think the way towards that as a general stepping stone is these clubs and schools need to have more resources for student athletes to get the help that they need, not only physically but mentally. And yeah, I mean, mental health is something that I think is overlooked a lot and is something that is very much important to address and important to keep in a stable area. So that's all for this episode. I'll see you next month.